a quick refresher. The objectives of the directive. Well, apart from being in response to G20 attacks on the alternatives industry, the directive is intended to create a level playing field across Europe for alternatives managers and to enable regulators to detect systemic risk. Effectively, it represents an attempt by Europe to impose on alternatives managers who are based within Europe and who trade into Europe a significant uptick in the regulatory environment within which they operate. So it's a real sort of, well, Ben Robbins used the phrase, it's an industrial revolution. It's going to transform what was a cottage industry into a much more sophisticated business. Timetable. The directive became European law this month. And we are now in the process of defining the flesh around the skeleton of the directive. The Level 2 consultation paper, which was a response to ESMA's request for help, was issued Wednesday of last week. 438 pages of detailed, condensed text, 78 questions, and a great number of choices that need to be made. With typical style, the paper was issued last Wednesday, and the consultation period, 2 months, closes September 15th or 16th. So anyone who is planning on a summer holidays light read, can I advocate taking the CP and rather than using it as a sort of headrest on the beach, read it and digest it and think about it. And Brendan is at pains to say it's an easy read. I'm not sure I altogether agree with that, but that's his view. The other thing that will be coming along early next month or the month after, and Giles will be speaking more to this, is the crucial consultation paper around the relationship between the EU and third countries. And that is, for Jersey, possibly the most important component in the consultation process. The objective of ESMA is to issue their advice formally in November. They will issue their advice to the EU Commission. One's sincere prayer is that the Commission listen to the advice they receive from ESMA. However, unfortunately, there can be no certainty of that. And it's at that point that one starts to worry because the agenda then starts to become political rather than technocrat again. But that's just a risk we face and one where we need to be prepared to engage. Thereafter, the Commission will issue either an implementing directive or regulations. We're not quite sure how they're going to split that yet. The objective being to have those out midway through the back end of next year, certainly by the beginning of 2012. By the end of 2012, and the directive will become law across the EU by the 22nd of July 2013, my birthday, the Omen Day. Quick reminder, who's caught? A relatively low threshold. If you've got 100 million euro assets or more and you use leverage, you're in. If you've got 500 million or more of assets and you don't use leverage and your investors are subject to a minimum 5-year lockup, that's the threshold for PE. Important to remember, this is intended not to be product regulation. It is intended to regulate actors rather than product. So it's after managers and those who interface with them, depositories, administrators, valuers. So it isn't going to define strategies. It'll interfere with strategies because it'll interfere with leverage, but it won't actually say what you can or cannot invest in. Another reminder, introduction of a basic requirement for own capital, 125k euro plus a further 0.2% by reference to assets under management, up to a maximum of, I'm not sure that's right, 2 million. But there's a capital requirement in there. There's some interesting stuff in the level 2 about value of insurance and whether or not you can sort of replace capital with insurance or guarantees. Some interesting technical stuff, but certainly imposing higher levels with regard to reg capital than many players have currently been used to. This slide tends to break all of the rules of presentations. You can't read it from the front, let alone from the back. But just to summarize, it outlines the important timetable. And for people in Jersey, the timing is relatively crucial and important. If you're in Europe, July 2013, you get swept under by the tsunami in all its awfulness. If you're in Jersey, at that point, you're going to be considering how to continue to access EU investors. You're going to want to take advantage of the private placement regime of individual member states. The private placement regime basically will mean taking advantage of existing member states' routes to professional investors, the safe harbors that they currently have to allow you to offer to investors in those member states without registering your documentation. So the tolerance of the various regimes will likely be a reflection of the tolerance that exists there now. The UK, relatively easy to get into. France, not so easy to get into. Spain, virtually impossible to get into. Scandinavia, relatively easy, apart from Denmark. So it's going to be that local regime that will continue to bite. But an important thing to bear in mind is not to assume that the current status quo will continue. We expect that a lot of member states will be reviewing their private placement regimes to see whether or not they want to leave them as they are, or beef them up, or indeed relax them. But certainly something to watch. So 2013 through 2015, private placement. 2015, theoretically, the architecture for the passport for non-EU managers becomes available. And that's why Jersey is intent on creating a regulatory environment which will allow the opt-in. So that in 2015, for those managers who want to, they can have a domestic Jersey regime which is sufficiently robust to allow onshore regulators to tick the box and say, yes, a manager here has or is subject to a regime that is rigorous and delivers the same regulatory outcomes as our EU regimes do, and therefore you can register in Europe, member state of your choice, and sell your product throughout Europe on the same level playing field as EU domestic managers. That's the theory. That was the quid pro quo in the directive. There'll be a way to go to get there, but when the caption to today's event said Jersey embraces the AIFMD, it is that is implicit in the embrace. It's the creation of an environment which will allow people to take advantage of the passport if they want. So from 2015, we have two parallel regimes, private placement regime, passport regime, and actually one shouldn't forget the passive marketing regime. There may be some managers who are so confident of the quality of their product and of their track record that they feel no urge to market at all into Europe, but who are quite happy just to have investors come to them to sign up. They're totally outside the directive, and there may be some people who see themselves in that box. So 2015 through 2018, parallel regimes. In 2017, ESMA will review the operation of the private placement regime and the passport regime, and may decide to switch off the private placement regime.